everybody assumes that code audits are standard, and that's become. But why is there no operational standard? Why is there no accountability standard? And this is like our DeFi leaders have not yet had the opportunity to be measured in this way, and this is what we're trying to offer. Yeah, here's a way to demonstrate your accountability and your leadership in this area.
What is going on, Ada Nation? Welcome to Dapp Central, covering the latest, greatest news going on in Cardano. Today, I've got an awesome interview with RJ, the founder of CRCI. Now, they're going to be taking a first principles approach to DeFi and analysis on Cardano, basically providing overviews and ratings of projects building on the network. RJ, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Doing well, Fareed. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm excited to have you here. We've had an offline chat, and that was a really wonderful chat. You really kind of put a lot on my radar with respect to CRCI. And so I'm finally excited to get this on the books with an actual recording.
Good. Thanks. Fire away if you have any questions.
Will do. Will do. Now, as always, what I like to do is just do a brief overview of what we're going to be chatting about. So we're going to jump into a little bit of your background and what CRCI is, just generally speaking. And then I want to jump into, the criteria that you guys use to actually review projects. And then I want to jump into some of the recent projects that you guys have interviewed, or not interviewed, but reviewed, with one specific one that I do cover here on the channel. Last but not least, I want to get your future vision as to where you see CRCI in the next couple of months, as well as years, right? Everybody has a long-term vision when it comes to building in this space. So how does that sound to you?
Sounds great.
All right, let's go ahead and just jump right on in. So RJ, do you mind touching on a little bit of your background, how you came into the space, and then just giving us an overview of what CRCI is and its goal with respect to Cardano and blockchain in general?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been into the crypto space since early 2018. Came into the ICO mania. That was the bull run at those days, and that was EOS 2.0. And what was big at the time? Tezos, Komodo, I think I was interested in, Lisk, something like that. And I bought Charlie Lee's Litecoin. And if you understand that reference, I bought the top. And I rode that portfolio down, negative 80% for the next 3 years or so. And I got baptized into the realm of learning how to do your own research. And that's kind of where ultimately this project comes from. So looking into how do I look at this space? How do I make sense of it? All these projects coming at us with all these promises, and trying to understand like what were these proposals all about? Is using terminology and words I'd never heard before. Looking at white papers, seeing math, that didn't make any sense. It's like, how am I to understand what is even good an investment in this case? So that was just my early baptism into like the hard knocks of trying to figure out crypto. So fast forward to now, we have a new layer, a new ecosystem of promises and projects building on Cardano and DeFi in general that are proposing to disrupt $1 trillion industry and have all these new ideas. And so here we are again with different capabilities, different teams trying to build new solutions on new technology that's changing underneath them. And we're still trying to navigate like what is a good option, right? To participate in, let alone invest in or whatever. So the CRCI is a structured approach into reviewing these projects. So we're trying to like ask all the questions that we can of the project, like where are we going to look in order to understand what the projects are building on. And so from all the questions that we laid out on the table, we just took the best of them and put them into 8 categories. And that's what we see are the most valuable things to look at when trying to evaluate DeFi. And those categories are social engagement, the communication of intent, which is the white papers and the documentation that describe what the problems and solutions that they're trying to build. We look at their tokenomics. We look at the team and the developers to see who's building what in this case. Then we look at the audits, the code audits, and the track record of the project. If they don't have a code audit, have they been functioning, well for however much time? Typically, almost all projects have a code audit. We look specifically at user protections, and I get a lot of questions. What does that mean? I mean, that means is there any way for the user to interact? If I'm engaging with this platform, how exposed am I to making a mistake that could cost me loss of my assets unintentionally? Is the documentation clear? Is the interface have pop-ups and bubbles and clarity of like intention? You know, when it says next, does it mean next you mean you're going to take all my crypto, or next we're moving to the next summary page? Like little details matter in this ecosystem, because there's no protection. There's no any mistake is permanently recorded to the blockchain, so that you can't really call it back. So it's so much more important that our processes are very clear and very user friendly in that sense. Okay, so we look at those things. We'd also look at industry accolades. So, for instance, like if there's a new project that we don't know about, but there's a lot of industry, people that we do respect and understand, are they? How do we look at them from that lens? So, for instance, if they won an award for doing a very complicated thing in a new technology, that should count towards some confidence in the project that they're a good actor, as opposed to the project that maybe not have had that echelon. It's not weighted very heavily, but it should count in that sense. So that's, again, giving the consumer confidence in that project. And then what's the most important and the most unique part of our reviewing process is the cumulative demerits. And that's meant to cover any situation that doesn't fit nicely into these categories. So project failures of any kind, essentially. So obviously hacks, or like, breaches of, security in some way. Breach of confidential information, like if you took our KYC and now our information is exposed, I mean, that's a strike, as you can imagine. But even down to certain levels of social contracts, or just bad engagement with the community. Like, we want to see our best projects, our leaders, lead in all ways, and including accountability. So how they interact and how they, engage with the community can fall into a demerit consideration. Those are just some examples.
Thank you for the introduction there, RJ. Really sounds like you're taking a look at not just the positives, right? But like you just mentioned there towards the end, the demerits, things that may actually be raised or considered as red flags. Now, one thing that I found really interesting about your project was the visualizations that you guys actually take to simplifying the analysis that you guys have done, right? So what we're looking at here is going to be the CRCI matrix. I believe this might be from the month of August, so maybe there's a new version out. Feel free to definitely share that with me here offline. But I wanted to show this as an example for people in the community. What I really like about this is the 4 quadrants that you have, right? So at the top left-hand corner, we've got the visionaries. To the right of that, we've got the leaders. Towards the bottom, we've got the contenders. And then at the very bottom right-hand side, we've got the challengers. And so for me, because I cover so much content and so many projects, given that the channel is Dapp Central, it's always fascinating to see where you have these projects ranked. And so not only do you provide a holistic view like this, you also go into actual details surrounding the analysis for each particular project. So the next thing I want to jump into, and you kind of touched on this, but do you mind explaining the criteria that CRCI uses when reviewing DeFi projects?
Sure. Well, like what I was getting to, these criteria, the questions we ask fit into those categories. So, like, for instance, like in the social engagement, we don't look at numerical values, like how many TikTok followers they have. Like, those are metrics that can be bought or whatever, and they're not meaningful. But we do look at like the engagement. Are they answering questions? Are they engaged with the community? Are they just talking about their buy our token now, price is going to go up, and making all these promises? What's the quality of their engagement on social, and their social engagement in this case? We'll look at their website. And that's actually the first line of defense. Like, is information easy to find? And then that's a bad actor would intentionally obscure, details. In this case, we want to see easy to find information that we can educate ourselves on the project, especially including the documentation for the application itself. Like, if we want to see like video content on like here's the next step. Here's what happens when you click this button. So there's no mystery. Like it's an obvious, clear case. And there's a lot of room to grow for a lot of our projects in this space. Because there's still, I mean, I can understand and appreciate that there's a priority of like, they're still doing the hard stuff. Like Plutus version 3 is probably going to come out at some point, and we're going to have to rewrite everything again. So there's so many layers of what's important to be done from an architectural and competitive point of view from their perspective. But from the consumer perspective, we need to have those layers of understanding this application, really well. So if we can't find it, that's we're looking at those kind of details from the social engagement kind of point of view. So that's just one example of like the kinds of things that we look for, and we do the similar thing for the white papers. Their tokenomics. We look at the tokenomic modeling, try to roughly to gauge how exposed the user is to a liquidation event from the team or the insiders, and like looking at how many tokens were assigned and their vesting schedules. And you can judge for yourself that when you're engaging at this stage, if this is like how much you want to commit to that based on these variables, that the team is about to get all their tokens unlocked and you're now exposed to them walking away. So those are just, again, we measure these things, we have our opinions on them, and we put them out there, but we those are some of the examples of things that we look at.
I think it's really awesome to see, and this visual is so helpful for me. Again, I am a visual learner, and so if you were to like explain this without me seeing this, it would be really hard to connect the dots. But something like this makes it so easy to understand what you're looking at. And one thing that I really like about what you're doing within the space is not only are you watching out for the projects, you're also providing users who are investing their hard-earned dollars and funds into these projects, right? So it's a win-win on both of them, or for the both of them. But with respect to this particular graphic here, there's three sections. So there's a technical analysis, right, which is made up of chain explorers, wallets, trends, and charts. And then there's a huge chunk in the middle there, which is the fundamental analysis, which includes, as you mentioned, social engagement, the community, or excuse me, the communication of intent, tokenomics, team, etc. And then on the right-hand side, there's the sentiment analysis. So if I understand it correctly, are you taking scores from each category and then coming up with a final score? And if not, how are you coming up with the final verdict surrounding each project that you review?
Right. That's a good point. So it's important to understand from our point of view the lane that we're in. So we're focused on that fundamental analysis, content, and it's mostly the content that's off chain. Well, I mean, with the exception of tokenomics and looking at the code audits and stuff like that. But we're looking at the operational processes of a project. I attended a leadership event many years ago, and I think it was John Maxwell. He said, like out loud, he said, "Success and failure are not events; they're the manifestations of a process." And so I've taken that ever since, and just realized, like, how are these projects setting themselves up for success or failure? Because it's not an event. Well, it can be when there's a hack. I guess that's an event, but you can guard yourself against that with your process, with due process, and we're looking at that process point of view of a project. So on-chain data and charts and trend analysis and things like that, that's numerical, and that's all in the past, right? We're all looking at content that's in the past, and it has its value, and there's a whole industry around that, right? And then sentiment analysis is generally the domain where bad actors thrive. that's the FOMO zone. That's the group think. That's like kind of herd mentality, where if you have an opinion that counters the narrative, there's that cancellation effect on your opinion. So you tend not to voice it. So there tends to be a one giant group mentality around a certain narrative. So we're trying to be objective about all these things, and we're sticking to our lane. We do incorporate, though, like tokenomic analysis, maybe more advanced data that can help us form our opinion from our tokenomic perspective. We also do use sentiment analysis in the sense that we're paying attention to what like these real-time insights are, and can help us look in the right directions if there's a failure in the process from the fundamental operational side. So we do try to pick the best out of each domain, but we're laser focused on that fundamental component. And this is the domain that everyone insists on somebody else to do your own research. This is exactly what they mean. Look at the team. When there's an event that happens that, oh, I lost my money, I bought the wrong thing. Do your own research is the chant. And it's like, well, this is exactly what they mean. They don't mean look at more charts. They don't read more Twitter sentiment. They mean do the hard work, read, learn what you're investing in. Like in my ICO mania, buying the top, right? So do your research. You should know, learn more. And this is that domain.
I tend to agree with that statement surrounding do your own research. As a content creator, that's actually how I started off in this space, right? Was first off trying to look for content, not seeing it there, and then trying to see how I can personally fill in the gaps. And that has forced me internally to do research. And I can understand that sometimes people take my videos as the research being done, but I always urge them, even on my videos, just take what I say as a grain of salt, right? Nothing beats you reading the white paper, reviewing the tokenomics on your own, and then coming to your own conclusion. And I think that's what CRCI is in a nutshell as well, right?
That's
You're
right.
taking a lot of the front load in doing the research, etc., but it's always up to the end user to then use that in addition to whatever else they think makes sense to come to their own conclusion. And so let's move into the next thing here. We've touched on, how you're coming into your conclusion and what you're reviewing. Do you mind maybe touching on the benefits, right? So I can kind of understand the benefits from an end user's perspective. You're making sure that they understand what they're getting themselves into, and you're trying to provide them with as much research as possible surrounding whatever project is being analyzed, as well as just giving them the big picture with the CRCI matrix that we looked at. But do you mind maybe touching on some of the benefits for the projects as well? Because I think that's a viewpoint that probably not a lot of people are taking a look at with the use of CRCI.
Right. And that's the strong point. That's actually one of our business model is to partner with our DeFi projects. Can you imagine, if you had a bunch of people that were a yes men and you would never know where you needed to improve? Like you'd never have that feedback and that pushback. It's like, well, maybe we should reconsider the optic of this particular vector. And so this is like just an honest review. It's like from our opinion, again, this is our opinion, where we feel that ground could be made up. Like your white paper doesn't touch on your market analysis. It has no, competitor analysis. There's things that we feel that maybe if it's rounded out, we would like to see that from you. Oh, good point. Maybe we should run into that fire and spend some time on that because the ultimate goal for the Dapp projects is they want users. They need those transaction fees or whatever else that they're able to make money on their own. So we want to encourage them to like, well, if you build along these lines, like these are the lines that we presume the consumer cares about, is that transparency, those user protections I talked about earlier, and your accountability, like building along lines that we're trying to do the best. We're not trying to rush development. We're not trying to rush the product without supportive documentation or clarity of process that you can lose your money on, things like that. Like those are important things in this ecosystem, especially because there's no insurance. There's nobody we can call. Can you roll back that blockchain for me, please? And just so I can get all my assets back. Like we don't have that. That's what we're used to in the traditional finance ecosystem, but there's none of that here. So even more so, it's important for the projects that are building to build with extra special rigor. And it's not a report card. I don't like saying that, but that's kind of the reflect. Like here's your score. Like here's where you sit from our perspective. And good, well-meaning leaders in this industry would run into that. They would they're begging for that opportunity to like, where can we be even better? I mean, there is, like I say, there is a priority of technical challenges that they still need to overcome. But in this domain, we demand that they need to be excellent because these are we're one-to-one with our assets. We can lose them all with a mistake, intentional or not. We can lose them all. So we need to insist on diligence and accountability from our DeFi leaders.
I always like to state that transparency is key, especially in this space, right? Now, the blockchain offers that, but a lot of stuff happens off chain that may not necessarily be open or seeable by the general public, right? So I think if projects are willing to, like you said, go through the fire, put their reputation on the line, and get an honest review as to where they are, it opens up I think, two benefits. From the community's perspective, it's like, okay, these guys are willing to actually go through this process and get an honest review. And then from the project side, they're then able to see a reflection of themselves in the mirror, right? Do
Hmm.
we need to update our tokenomics? Do we need to maybe better strengthen our communication of intent?
Hmm.
Do we need to, up these kind of things that might be shown as a part of the CRCI score that can then turn around and actually help them even more?
That's it.
Now, on the flip side, for bad actors, they would be very hesitant to actually get a CRCI score, right? So if you see a project that's potentially avoiding or maybe um, dismissing their CRCI review, I think that says more about them than the actual review itself, right? Because if the review is unbiased, no emotion involved, you're taking a holistic review of the actual platform or the protocol, they should be open to hearing, what a reputable platform has to say about them. And then if they're really here for the long game, they'd be more than open to, number one, hearing how you came to that conclusion, and then number two, trying to better that to then get a better score, which then drives more confidence in the actual protocol itself. So I see so many benefits here for projects. Again, they can see themselves, and then this also helps to hopefully weed out bad actors if they're looking to run away from a CRCI review. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this is a very important point. Bad actors are going to get reviewed. If you're offering a token, selling it to the community, a project, you're up for a review. There's you came at us, so you're open now. And in that honest review, it's like, look, you don't look good, or there's a case that you might not look good. And that's we're not replacing an investor's due diligence. They can still, a lot of people want to find those gems. They want to find those ones that are score low because they know something better and they can invest and be really early on stuff like that. And that's the energy in the ecosystem since Bitcoin ever started, right? Get in early on those hidden gems. But it's so important to understand that the CRCI reviews only content that's publicly available. So there's no, like, if we're engaged with the DeFi project and then there's score spikes, there's going to be an associated real world evidence of a change in that domain. Like if their social engagement's at 2 out of 10, and all of a sudden now they partner with CRCI, now it's an 8 out of 10, there's going to see an actionable change. And if there isn't, then that's where our credibility, that's how we're held accountable to our process, right? um, Everything that we look at is the same content everybody else looks at. In fact, we're doing what everybody else does. When everybody else looks at an opportunity to invest, you go through this process. You look on Twitter, you get a sentiment, you hear a spaces, you go on a YouTube, you learn about projects, and you have a scorecard in your head, or even like a spreadsheet or some other process that people use to, okay, I'm like this project, I'm going to invest or participate. This The CRCI is just a very formalized process in this case. And we've been very intentional about architecting it to reduce as much bias as possible, including the projects that we may like or dislike. Can we still be objective about the content we're specifically looking at, and not measuring the content that's not on there? And that's very important. So from an objective point of view, um, our scores are user auditable. I guess I'll put it that way, because we're looking at all the same content. So our credibility is on the score of being consistent, and that's something that we're proud of and that we do offer, is that consistency. We have a process and a documented, structured approach to scoring our projects in the ecosystem. So, and that can change over time, and we want to improve it. And as we engage with more people and more community members and more projects, I'm confident it's just going to be better and better, and we'll be looking in the right ways and at the right things, and improving our value over time.
That's actually going to be the last question that I posed to you, but there's one other thing I
Sure.
want to jump into before we talk about how you plan on improving and growing, your name here within the Cardano community. So we've touched on quite a bit. Let's jump into one particular project that seems to have wishy-washy, I guess, for a lack of better term, right, sentiment when it comes to the community. Now, sentiment was just 1/3 of the things that you look at. I think when we take a look at the fundamentals, though, that same project seems to actually be showing some really great progress. So that's going to be MELD, right? So when we take a look at the matrix here, I see MELD is listed right below Indigo. It's kind of like in that top right-hand quadrant within the leaders. You know, there's been, again, really extreme sentiment. You either love MELD or you hate MELD. I definitely cover MELD here on my channel. So for anybody watching, I don't think that comes as a surprise. I'm actually an ambassador for MELD, but I get to see some of the things behind the scenes that they're building, you know? So for you to have them listed here within the leaders category, do you mind touching on why that is when some people seem to be polarized by the project? Some people seem to say that they're building on other networks. You know, again, you're taking a fundamentals or a first principles approach, and you're not necessarily buying into what is being tweeted, but you're looking at some of the other things. So how did you come to this conclusion with MELD?
Right. So it's actually important for us to have MELD on that scorecard right now. One thing I will say is that that is a little bit older of a review at this point. But, you know, it still holds up in a lot of areas. So it's interesting. That's actually the project that I get the comments on the most, I think. So why is MELD there? They're not even on Cardano. They stole our money. Those kind of sentiment. And you know, it's an interesting. Everything that happens in our spaces sets new precedent. Everything that happens. You know, MinSwap had a situation where they had their total value locked was exposed to total loss in the wild. It was captured by another project, like Wing Riders, of course, and they you know made sure that nothing actually got lost. So you know they saved the day in that sense. So that was good, but that was a good question. Like, how do we score that? How do we look at that? So with MELD, we have a situation where okay, they started on Cardano, they built on Cardano, they still have content in the GitHub that's and a wallet and all sorts of things that are on Cardano, but they for various regulatory and technical reasons they've moved to another their own blockchain, which is interesting. When we talk about like how they raise money, which is not something we look at specifically, I should say, it's also we don't look at which chain these projects are on. That's not one of the criteria, and we can certainly understand if that's why you invested in them. Like, we're not here to override your opinions and your investment. We don't offer investment advice. We're just simply reviewing the fundamental components of the projects. So, when we still look at MELD, do they have similar, just as many hurdles as they had when they first started, whether they're on Cardano or on their own chain? Regulation in the short time that it's been around is already changing around them. But we're still looking at their social engagement, their communication of intent. And that ironically recently has had to, take a couple U-turns, but we're in this ecosystem. We opted into participating in DeFi. It's a dynamic, challenging landscape. If there's, activity or ideas that fall outside the fundamental domain, we can totally understand like how it could be not our score, which has them high, might be opposed to anyone else's opinion about the project. But that's exactly where we stick to our fundamentals and our objectivity about how we review things. I don't own any MELD, for example, but it's still scored as one of the higher ones based on the things that we look at. So it's just an interesting particular project to look at, and it's a good test. It's a good test of objectivity, right? Can we be objective about a contentious project? Like, for instance, their ISBO, some sentiment in the ecosystem is that they stole our money. It says, well, no, because everybody that participated in the ISBO opted in. They opted in to trade their ADA emission rewards, not their assets, not their own personal holdings, just the rewards from their holdings in exchange for the MELD token. And why would they do such a thing? It's because they felt that MELD token would have a higher upside than the ADA would have, of the same roughly equivalent value. So that was an opted-in relationship. In fact, MELD allocated 20% of their tokens to be freely distributed to the community, which is, I Dapp still believe to this day one of the highest token percentage allocations of airdrops on the networks still so far. It went so well that they actually had to increase it to 22.9 because kind of they ran over. So from the MELD holder's point of view, what is MELD's priority? It's to the MELD token holders, right? To build their project that works. And if that works best by making the decisions that they've made, maybe that's the best thing. Again, those aren't things we look at in our review. We're trying to still look at those domains that we cover. So it's just an interesting project to take a look at. What we'll probably do is take another relook because, again, a lot of things have changed since our last review. It may move the needle. I'm curious to see where it lands now because, again, it's interesting to see because I'm just as curious as anyone else about where this lands from a new relook at a project. And there's a lot of projects that we still haven't covered. Spectrum Finance is coming up, and there's other projects that are just launching. Linkage Finance, they have all these other projects that are coming into the space. I'd like to see, where they land in this review process. So
I've got so many things I want to say here. I'll try to keep this as brief as possible before we jump into the last question. So I'll start off with MELD first, and then I'll kind of generalize as I go along.
Sure.
So with MELD, again, I believe in what they're doing, and I think they've been transparent. One thing I like about CRCI and what you guys are doing is you guys are taking a similar approach to what I'm doing here with my channel, right? Which is a professional, fact, and evidence-based approach to everything. So even though the sentiment might not be all there right now, they've shown well and plenty of times that they are building, right? They've got that open source code repository. Yes, they are building as well on Avalanche. I completely understand that some people might not be happy about that, but they've been fully transparent as well with their communication that they are still going to be launching on Cardano. They're working with IOG on a particular issue that they see as a risk, which could potentially put the protocol at jeopardy on Cardano, right? And what is the benefit to anybody, especially if you're a MELD token holder, if they rush to get something out, only to then have all the TVL drained, right? You mentioned MinSwap and how they were potentially open to something, and now they're heralded as one of the biggest dexes right now. But even they had a blip on their radar when they first started. So I think that within this community, we have to have patience, and we have to understand that at the end of the day, if MELD has an attack, that is going to impact everybody. Nobody wants that. So if they're going to take the slow and steady route, I am more than happy to let them do that. And again, I think the biggest thing with that is just the fact that they kind of stepped out and said, okay, we're also going to build our own sidechain. On top of that, their NFTs, their code, their community was all Cardano based, and it still is Cardano based. There was actually just an interview with Cardano with Paul earlier today touching on MELD, and I recommend that anybody here who wants to find out about what MELD is doing and what their plans are, definitely go ahead and check that out. So to sum that up in a nutshell, I like the fact that you guys are not so persuaded by the sentiment, and that you guys are looking at the facts when you're actually coming to your conclusion. Now, stepping back a little bit, one thing that you mentioned there is that you're chain agnostic. And so I commend you for that as well, because I think a lot of projects can be bound to Cardano, especially when they're born within Cardano. And MELD is a clear example. We just saw World Mobile announce that they're going chain agnostic. And again, there was some sentiment around that. Some people were happy. Some people are saying, well, why are you guys building on Cardano and then leaving? We saw the same thing with Paribus. We saw the same thing with Cornucopias. There's so many projects that don't just have a home in Cardano. It's just their biggest home is in Cardano. So I think the community has to just come to grips that Cardano has to talk and interact with other chains. We cannot live in our own bubble. So to hear that CRCI isn't only focusing on projects within Cardano is a positive, I think, overall. So,
well, and I mean, the Cardano's our home. Like this is where I particularly specifically have grown up. My home is Cardano, and I know the projects. I know a lot of the people. I've been in the ecosystem since early 2018 on the forums. I've made a couple of educational resources and a stake pool operator since the ITN. I mean, there's a lot of I've invested a lot in this ecosystem and this community, and this is what we know. But if we're asking the right questions of DeFi, we're asking the right questions of DeFi. Regardless of the chain and regardless of the momentum, and actually interoperability is one of the three pillars of Cardano's, development, and so it is a cornerstone. But we can certainly sympathize with people that, like, if they invested in MELD or any of these projects because they're only going to be on Cardano and they increase the value of the Cardano, ecosystem or whatever, understood. Like, we're not here to override that decision. Like, that's this again, we're just trying to be objective about the things that we are looking at, and that's its own challenge to make sure that we're still in our lane and not overreaching. But trying to be objective, and again, our intentions are to increase the value for everybody. And because I don't know if I'm alone, but I'm pretty fatigued about opportunistic bad actors, taking advantage of a system that has no layer of protection and no layer of accountability, really. And so this is the vacuum that we're running into. We're trying to, can we at least explore this domain of operational process accountability? And that's the nutshell what the CRCI is, which segues into the Catalyst proposal. We've done a tremendous amount of work up until this point. We put over 18 months of research and development and getting our MVP out. And we're looking to the community, to Catalyst, to get to our public face, that we can get our web application out, so we can get our research and our ideas and our, scores out in front of the public. Because right now we're just posting on Twitter, and the back end's a spreadsheet at this point. So we really want to get to the next phase, and it's a bear market. Everyone's struggling. When we completely sympathize, and we just humbled at the opportunity if people took a look, and if we can all agree that this is something that needs to exist, some sort of measure of accountability, an attempt to be objective and just put these projects on a map and highlight and spotlight our best builders and our leaders and pose a barrier to our bad actors.
Wonderfully said. I'll definitely go ahead and leave the links to all of the Catalyst proposals that RJ has proposed for the Cardano community.
Just
when
one.
it comes.
Just one
Okay.
proposal.
Perfect. Short and sweet. But
Yeah.
I'll leave the link to that down in the description. Now, I do want to just jump into one minor thing, and then we're going to close this interview out.
Sure.
So you mentioned, having to do an update, for example, speaking just on MELD, but how often do you actually go through the process of updating these CRCI reviews? And is that at the project's leisure, or is that something that you on your end kind of dictate how often and when these updates are needed?
Well, right now in our MVP stage, it is as resources allow, and as we're still building out a lot of the other infrastructure, the back end, the business, and a lot of other stuff. But as we move forward, that's our value proposition, and that's our business case, that we're going to be engaging with our DeFi builders that are wanting to improve that marketing opportunity for their score by proof of the evidence of their building along lines of their transparency, their user protections, and their demonstration of their accountability. So, to get to that phase, we want to just get that public facing web application in the hands of our community, and then we can have really good conversations. So as that happens, it's not to be determined yet, but there's likely going to be a quarterly cadence or monthly cadence, perhaps, of how often projects can get re-reviewed. Linkage Finance might want to keep their eye on that, because again, they score very low, but it'd be a great demonstration of their accountability to the community, that they're engaged with a third-party assessment review process to show the community, maybe don't count us out yet. We're working along the lines to increase these our footprint on how we're transparent and how we're building with the user in mind first. Even though we know we might not be there yet, but don't count us out. And almost certainly, all the bad actors are going to bypass that effort, because they'd have to do a lot of work to produce those results of building with transparency and accountability, which they're not here to do, right? So there's an opportunity for our DeFi leaders to, even if they score low, to separate themselves from the bad actors in the competition in that way. So
For me, it's interesting because this can play out in two ways, right? You can either have a project with strong fundamentals and bad sentiment, or a project with no fundamentals and strong sentiment, right? And I feel like your job is to kind of level and give a non-biased opinion as to where they actually fall. So to that end, thank you for that answer. I've got one more thing. Again, as you're speaking, I'm just thinking of more things which
sure.
coming up to mind. Let's say I run a project on Cardano.
Hmm.
how can I get in touch with you, number one, or how can I actually view my score if you've already done an analysis on my project?
Right. Well, first of all, right now, without our, we have a very simple website, like it's kind of our landing page website, for lack of a better term. But just even through Twitter, just through DM, we'll answer. Like if you need to reach out, we would love to connect with all of our DeFi projects. We've reached out to many of them, and we know many of them already. We're kind of, again, still formulating our business, services, but we can start that conversation, get everybody in the queue, and get things all lined up so that when the web application gets up, we're ready to go, and it's a good look. And the program that we're building has, it's a win-win-win. Like the projects win because they can be held accountable to things that they just might not even know where they're lacking from a objective point of view. The community wins because there's a layer of, you know, objective reviews in the ecosystem that they can use on their own path and on their own journey, which something I wish I had back in 2018. In this case, there's no radar, there was no sense of where to start, right? So the community wins, and then we all just win just by like raising the standards, and this like being a new layer that people can look at with some integrity in this space where we struggle at a jurisdictional level on many cases. So here's an effort, a homegrown effort to like, here's a well-meaning project that we want to, work together and elevate everybody. So I'm trying to do.
No, I think you're doing it already, RJ. I think in order for us to be taken seriously, we have to take ourselves seriously, and
Yeah.
that's by making sure that we weed out any bad actors and that we um, let the good builders actually be made known that they are good builders, right?
Mhm.
It takes a lot of time, and people are putting in their blood, sweat, and tears into this ecosystem. And I
Mhm.
think they should be rewarded with that, with somewhat of a quote unquote badge of honor that lets the community know, hey, this is a trustworthy project.
Yeah.
And the opposite for anybody who's trying to siphon money and take advantage of the community, letting the community know, hey, this is what you're getting yourself into. If you still want to invest,
Yeah.
you have our overview, but do so at your own risk.
That's right. And
So
it's like everybody assumes that code audits are standard, and that's become, but why is there no operational standard? Why is there no accountability standard? And this is like our DeFi leaders have not yet had the opportunity to be measured in this way. And this is what we're trying to offer. Yeah, here's a way to demonstrate your accountability and your leadership in this area. So just as they do with code audits, so
that's a
it's
really
brand new.
good way. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's a really good way to put it. And again, this has been helpful for me to connect the dots. Now, the very last thing I want to ask you before I let you go here, RJ, is going to be surrounding something that you touched on earlier. You're a brand new platform. There's a proposal out, but what additional things are coming down the pipes that we can expect to better enhance the experience when we're looking at CRCI and their fundamental analysis?
Sure. Thank you for asking. Like, I mean, right the immediate in front of us, like we've done so much work. So, if you would have asked 18 months ago, there was no, wouldn't know where this would be at this point. Right now, there is so much groundwork laid. We really are just anxious to get this in front of the community because we want it to be relevant and improved even from where it is. Um, so we want that feedback. We want that engagement with our DeFi builders. Um, we want them to have a platform that they can come to, and just in the sense of like going to code audits, we're going to be one of the first and one of the few that can offer these operational process audits. And again, it's a review and it's an opinion that our DeFi user community, and especially new entrants into the space, can maybe use as a reference point. They can see that quadrant, and where should I spend my time, and where should I spend my energy if I only have so much time and so much capacity to understand this whole domain. Where should it be well spent in this case? And again, we're just offering one vector of opinion on that, and there's going to be the technical and the trading charts and numbers and prices that they're going to want to consider, and they're going to want to maybe consider what's on the social network radar in that sense. But getting down to the fundamental analysis is kind of like the VC level research is kind of what we're offering to the community, roughly speaking.
Thank you, RJ. I'm excited to see what has already been built and hear about the future vision that you have laid out for CRCI. Again, for the viewers here, CRCI, I'm going to go ahead and leave the link to all of their socials as well as their official website, which is available at crci.review. They're taking a first principles approach to DeFi fundamentals and analysis. Again, RJ, pleasure speaking with you. I look forward to collaborating with you in the near future. I know that this is just the beginning of something great. Again, I really like the fact that what you're doing somewhat matches with what I'm doing here on the channel, trying to take a non-biased approach to covering Cardano and expanding the community's knowledge as to what's going on here. So on that note, any last thoughts that you want to share with the community?
No, I just want to say thank you very much, Fareed. Your energy in this ecosystem is refreshing, and I really appreciate that you're here. And thank you so much for having me on and the opportunity to share some of the energy and the passion I have for this project.
You are completely welcome, RJ. Again, it's been a wonderful time having you on here, breaking down what CRCI is bringing to Cardano and blockchain. Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it there from the man himself. If you guys want to find out more about CRCI, again, check out the description down below. If you guys have any questions for myself or RJ, go ahead and actually leave those down in the comment section. And as always, we'll catch you guys in the next video.